go. Oh, wow, it even tells me. Okay. It's good to know. Okay. So we'll probably, oh, it doesn't tell me what time it is, and I don't have my, okay. Well, we'll wait a minute or two and get started. Let's see what time it is here. Okay. Then, we'll give people a couple minutes to get in here, and I'll move my camera, my candles, so you can actually see them, because what's the point of having little candles if they're not visible? Well, hopefully they're visible on the side. I can't see this part of my screen, so it's a mystery. All right.
Screen. There you guys are. Hi.
Hi.
I just saw Michaela earlier this afternoon.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Like I said, we are going to be recording, and we should get started in just a minute. So I just want to give people a chance, as it just hit 6:30, if they want to trickle in. But we won't wait too long, because no one wants to hang out just,
staring at us.
Yes, staring at us.
But we do have cool friends.
We do. So
I'm liking the mysterious co-host in the middle.
Oh,
yes. Yeah, we will be
Well,
introduced to our mysterious co-host a little bit later in the program. So they will come up.
In some form.
Yes. So
Some form. I like that little foreshadowing.
all right. Well, do you want to get started, or?
Let's do it. Yeah.
All right. So welcome everyone to Tales from the Ghost Coast. Me and Joshua and our mysterious co-host helping out. We are going to just tell you a couple ghost stories, and we're gonna do that, and maybe chat a little about our personal experience with ghosts, possibly. But let's get started with Joshua's ghost. Well, actually, no. First, we're gonna check in with our mysterious co-host to make sure the creepy dolls from the attic are exactly where they're supposed to be and aren't sneaking around.
Okay.
All right, mysterious co-host. They're coming. I promise. They like to make us wait. Oh, there we go. Okay. I think we're good. They look still, no movement. All right. Well, let's get to the story then. Let's hear from Joshua. There we
Hi,
go.
everybody. Oh, here we go. All right. So I'm going to tell you a ghost story about a place on the Oregon coast that you can visit that happens to be haunted. Have you ever heard of the Yakino Bay Lighthouse? Yeah, yes. It's in Newport. Great.
Wait.
So that's what my story is going to be about. So a little facts about the Yakino Bay Lighthouse. It was actually built in 1871, but it closed 3 years later in 1974. Not for any suspicious reasons or anything. It was just because it's built in a poor location. The seas, or the ships at sea, were unable to see the warning beams. So it wasn't a very good lighthouse. The Yakina Head Lighthouse was built to replace it, and it's a much better lighthouse. But what is cool about the Bay Lighthouse is that it was built in the Cape Cod style. I'm going to give you guys a picture of what that's going to look like. Just a second. All right.
Hello, Kitty.
Can you all see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this
Yes.
is the Yakino Bay Lighthouse as it looked in 1900. So you can see the Cape Cod style. You had the lightkeeper's house uh, at the bottom right here. And on top was the lantern tower with a whale oil lantern. Right. This is actually one of very few Cape Cod style lighthouses on the West Coast and the only one in Oregon. Since it has been built, it has been used by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, as well as the Coast Guardsmen, who were the precursors of the U.S. Coast Guard. It was to be torn down in 1946, but residents of Newport loved it so much that they formed a human chain blocking the bulldozers from destroying the building.
Wow.
Then the lighthouse was restored and turned into a museum. Today, the lighthouse is fully restored and operational. So instead of a whale oil lantern on top, it uses a photocell that lights up in the dark. And it is the oldest standing structure in Newport. It is part of the Yakina State Park, and you can visit this lighthouse. The lighthouse is open every day, except for holidays, of course. And in winter season, it's closed on Mondays and Tuesdays. But we're really here to talk about the hauntings, right? About this place. Okay, so local legends have the following to say about what happens in the Bay Lighthouse. Apparently there's been sightings of mysterious lights in the tower. There's been sightings of a red-haired sailor who has a gleaming skull. And also people have heard screams during storms. These stories began circulating pretty soon right after this closure. And people think it could be one or both of some very locally famous ghosts. One of these possible ghosts could be of Evan McClure. Evan McClure was the captain of the whaler Moncton. And Evan McClure was not a good guy. Okay, he was not a very good captain either. He was a drunkard, he was lecherous, and he liked to fight with his crew members. And one night he had one too many fights with his crew members, and they mutinied, and they kicked him off the boat. They made him sail off in a paddle boat onto the sea and said, "Here you go, find land." Unfortunately, Evan McClure was never seen again. But the very same boat that he was sent off in was found on the rocks of the Devil's Punch Bowl. But no Evan there. Since then, there have been sightings of a man in sailor's uniform just hanging around the beach. And also people have heard calls for help at sea. Locals claim that soon after the lighthouse was vacated, the sightings on the beach ceased, and people believe that Evan moved into the lighthouse. But the story I'm going to tell you is about a very particular ghost, a woman named Muriel Trevenard. And she disappeared in 1874 in that lighthouse. Okay, I'm going to show you a little picture that has a relation to that story. Just bear with me real fast. All right. Oops, I forgot this one. Here's the lighthouse as it is today. It's a really pretty place, isn't it? Okay, but this picture, okay, in the story I'm going to tell you, it takes place on this beach, and there's the lighthouse in the distance. This group of people here, they're not the vacationers in the story, but they are eerily similar to the vacationers on that ill-fated night in 1874. Okay, so the story I'm going to tell you, get ready, is called The Handkerchief. She climbed the sand dunes swiftly, giggling at her daring, as the soft mist of an evening fog danced around her. The ocean waves thundered against the beach below, and the wind slapped her face, driving sand into her eyes as if warning her to stay away. But she kept climbing, though her feet slipped often in the shifting sand and long grass, heading steadily upward toward the abandoned gray house that sat on the ridge between the sea and the harbor, the Haunted Lighthouse. At least, that's what some folks in town call it. Muriel was new to Newport and had been bored with life until a group of vacationers arrived for the season. Many were young as she was, and she delighted in their company and joined them as they explored the tide pools, the sea caves, and sang around the campfire. One of them suggested visiting the abandoned lighthouse. Muriel had felt a pang of warning in her ribs. The weather-beaten home with the light perched up top like an afterthought was the source of several stories around town. Folks said the mysterious lights sometimes appeared in darkened windows, and that moans and shrieks could be heard from the top floors during the foggy hours just before a storm. They told Muriel that no one had died there and that no one knew the source of the lights and the sounds. Muriel laughed at these stories, even if she half believed them. And the idea of visiting the lighthouse made her nervous. Still, her friends wanted to go, and they had persuaded the caretaker of the lighthouse to loan them a key. She went with them in spite of her misgivings. Now, they were standing next to the rickety old house that surrounded the rickety old fence that surrounded the building before them. The dilapidated box-like structure with its creepy, crooked little porch and tall, ominous door loomed menacingly in the glowing fog. Clouds had darkened the late afternoon sun, and the cracked windows of the house looked like black eyes, peering menacingly down on the eager faces of the young people who dared approach it. Muriel gave a sudden shudder, her skin prickly. One of the boys saw her shiver and jeered. Afraid, Muriel? I'm not, she said, jutting out her chin. And even if she were afraid, and truth be told she was, she would never have admitted it to her chums. She seized the arm of her beau, Harold, and marched him right up the door. Harold obediently produced a key, and with a few clicks of the lock, the group was inside the dusty interior of the staircase. The two other girls with them giggled and went to explore the kitchen, while the boys peered into the cellar. In the dark, caused by the lowering clouds and swirling fog, the gaping black mouth of the cellar was a bit too creepy for Muriel. She grabbed Harold by the hand and pulled him upstairs where it was lighter. The stairs creaked and groaned under their weight, and Muriel shuddered. The abandoned house made her feel very uncomfortable. It was so bare, so empty. A loose shutter banged suddenly against the side of the house. Muriel nearly jumped out of her skin. Even Harold squawked in alarm. They both laughed shakily when they realized what had happened. Their voices echoed through the hollowed room. Harold led Muriel into one of the front rooms. They glanced about the room, too cavernous without its furnishings, and then wandered up the second staircase, peeking into a tiny room beside the metal corkscrew stair leading up to the lantern tower. The room was no bigger than a linen cupboard, Muriel thought, looking over Harold's shoulder. There came the thump of footsteps pounding up the staircase. The rest of the group crowded into the small space. Ooh, moaned one of the girls. Ooh, I'm the ghost of the house. Leave now or die. Waved her arms in the best imitation of a menacing specter. To Muriel, she looked like a fool. Feigning terror, the youngest boy backed away from the ghost and into the wainscoting on the wall. A piece broke off and clattered down the steps. Ah, now look what you made me do, puffed the boy. This place is falling apart. They all saw it. An iron panel gleamed in the gap of the wall. The youngest of the group tapped on the iron. A hollow knock rung through the cupboard. It chilled Muriel, who clenched her teeth. Nonsense, she whispered. Let's see if we can move it, Harold said, and with two of his friends removed the iron square, revealing a narrow crawl space with a gaping black hole at the bottom. Everyone gasped and took turns looking into the void. One intrepid lad crawled inside to drop a pebble into the hole, though no sound was heard to signal the bottom of the pit. The hair on Muriel's arm prickled at the thought of smugglers crawling up the dark hole into the uncanny old house, or pirates stashing their ill-gotten loot in the empty rooms, waiting to load them into their ship. Anything or anyone might slink up through the hole, her face flushed, though she shivered as if chilled. Muriel pulled out her handkerchief with shaking fingers and wiped her suddenly sweaty forehead. Let's get out of here, she said, jittery and backing away from the crawl space toward the stairs. No one jeered at her this time. Truth be known, they all were more than a little frightened. The light from the window opposite dimmed as the fog outside thickened. Muriel could only see the fingers of mist, coaxed by the sea wind, caress the window glass. We haven't been to the tower yet, Harold said, catching her shoulder lest she escape down the stairs. Muriel swallowed her dread and nodded with what she hoped was a carefree smile. One by one, they climbed the ladder to the tower and looked down into the mist and looming darkness. You can't even see the ocean, complained the ghost girl. This fog makes me lonesome. Let's go back to camp. Thinking of the gaping black hole to nowhere below them, Muriel was quick to agree. It didn't take them long to swarm the ladder, down 2 flights of creaky worn stairs, and out into the foggy dark. As Muriel stood beside Harold, watching him lock the door to the lighthouse, she reached again for her handkerchief to dab the bead of sweat that came from a leaf, only to realize that it was gone. Harold, I've forgotten my handkerchief, she exclaimed, wishing just after she had said that she had bit her tongue. Too late. Gallantly, Harold volunteered to get it for her, and in his eyes, she saw the taunting regard, same as the other boys that teased her. To Harold, she was just another pretty girl to be protected or mocked. Muriel felt a surge of anger. Oh, no need, she said swiftly. Lock the door and go on. I'll go meet you down the hill. She turned and marched up the staircase, not bothering to look back. Behind her, the door creaked and snicked shut, followed by the key turning in the lock. She realized then how alone she was in this dark and drafty house, deathly alone. Dread seized her, urging her to run. But what a fool she would be if she would return without her handkerchief. Stilling terror's icy claws, Muriel forced herself across the landing and up the second staircase toward the linen cupboard. She paused once, pulse thrumming. Was that a thump she heard just upstairs? Don't be silly, she told herself, raising her leg to take another shivering step. It's just the loose shutter blowing in the wind. As if in reply, a chill breath brushed the back of her neck. And then she heard it, a drawn, ragged gasp. Harold and crew beat their legs to the porous sand, back towards the lighthouse. And the terrible screams. Harold wrenched and wrenched at the key until the door opened. Just as
Here's
she
the cat.
cry for help.
I'm sorry.
They tore through the house, shouting for Muriel, but the house was deserted. Beside the linen cupboard and the iron ladder to the tower, they found the puddle of blood, darkened by the encroaching night, dripping down the scuffed wood stair. Beside it was a small, crumpled handkerchief, and Muriel was never seen again.
Oh, God.
The end of the story. Sorry if I scared anybody. So I have to admit something. This story is not really factual. Muriel didn't disappear in the tower. This was a story written by a writer named Lishan M. Miller, who lived in Eugene. And this story was originally published in 1899 in the issue
Wow.
of Monthly. But this story was so popular that people began to tell it around town, and then eventually it became true. True, in fact, that even local institutions would talk about going to this lighthouse. Like, for example, in the 1970s, reports have said that the Rotary Club of Newport had suggested that they go to the lighthouse at a certain time of day to hear the Muriel's ghost. But is it maybe Lishan M. Miller had a kernel of truth from the story? Because there's this account by a woman named Pat Stone. She was the curator for the Lincoln County the Lincoln County Historical Museum. And she told reporters in a 1975 article in the Register Guard that when she was at the lighthouse, she had heard footsteps upstairs on a gray and foggy evening. And they only stopped when someone came in for a tour. She claimed to have seen a lone figure wandering the beach, carrying a hurricane lamp. Even the Coast Guard staff who were stationed, who were doing patrols, claimed to have seen lights from the tower, even though the building itself was locked and vacated. And then there's the account from that Pat Stone got from a young hitchhiker. The young hitchhiker had come to Newport looking for work, and he spent the night at the lighthouse, just sleeping outside. But he woke up late in the night to see the apparition of a young woman floating on the second floor, just outside the second floor window. And she told him that the next day he would find a job. And according to the hitchhiker, he found work that the next morning. So it is true. Staff who work there now currently report nothing unusual happening in the lighthouse, but maybe they're just dormant, or maybe the ghosts are just waiting for you all to come and see them. Who knows? Anyway, that's the end of the haunting of the Yakino Bay Lighthouse.
Well, at least she was a friendly and helpful ghost to
there
that
we
young
go.
hitchhiker.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you kind of have like Casper and then like the evil uncle ghost, so kind of the spooky one and the nice
Right,
one.
right.
Yeah.
Joshua, I'm hearing a lot of noise from somebody else's. Maybe they have their mic on
Okay.
when you're talking, because I'm hearing a lot of noise.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm not sure how to do that. Okay, Michaela, would you like to go next?
Sure. And it might be just for now because we're so close together. We're not far enough apart, apparently. All right. Joshua, we need to check in. Okay, so he muted, so we should be good. So before I start my story, yes, we're gonna check in again with a mysterious co-host. I think we're doing it now. Yes. All right. See, doll's still good, even if we're a little echoey. All right. Mysterious oh, there we go. Okay. Think we're good. All right. I think we're safe to get started. So my story, I don't have as many historical facts, and I'm just warning you in advance that, I mean, it's a ghost story. People die and some dogs don't make it. Dogs are great, adorable. If you have a problem with, I mean, I have a problem with it, but if you don't want to hear that, this is the time to stop, because dogs be dying. All right, so I'm talking about Bandage Man. Dun, dun. He haunts the highway up by 101, and there's some talk of he's the most common occupation that he had, and what happened is that he was a logger who got to an accident, and some stories say that he died in the accident, the logging accident, and others, like this one, says that he was in an ambulance on the way to the hospital and got taken out by a landslide. So either way, didn't make it, probably a logger, died horribly. Okay, and my story is coming from Oregon's Ghosts and Monsters by Mike Helm, and it is his account of his encounter with Bandage Man. So prepare for some voices, because I'm gonna try to make it interesting here. All right, so one night in Cannon Beach. Are you hearing an echo still, or are we good before I get going? Okay, good. All right, so one night in Cannon Beach. Ever hear of Bandage Man? I asked the bartender in Bill's Tavern in Cannon Beach late one rainy evening last winter. Grizzled heads turned all along the bar, a row of eyes fixed upon me, and in the sudden barroom silence, I wondered if I'd said something wrong. Wasn't he a logger? Got hurt real bad or something? The bartender, newly arrived from California, pushed a glass of beer across the bar to me. Nah, I'll tell you about Bandage Man. The old man was half the length of the bar from me, and he said it so quietly that I barely heard, "Come on, Maud." He labored down from his perch on the bar stool and slapped a skinny thigh to beckon the fat old hound from where she slept at his feet. He carried his beer to a table near the door and crooked a finger at me as he settled into a comfortable wooden chair. Maud heaved herself under the table with a sigh. Thick rivulets of wind-driven rain rolled down the window as I crossed the smoky, wood-lined room. The old man wore a blue stocking cap and a rust-colored down vest. A thick fringe of gray hair struggled from beneath the cap, and a snow-white beard straggled down across his vest. He leaned comfortably back in the chair, clasped his weather-beaten hands across his stomach, and looked square at me with the clearest blue eyes I've ever seen. "See this newspaper article?" he asked, before I sat down, gesturing at the wall behind him to his right, where camouflaged in a jumble of similar memorabilia, a yellowed clipping hung from rusty staples. "Injured giant disappears in coastal landslide," blared the headline. "We all reckon," the old man said, glancing at the yellow clipping, "that fella became Bandage Man, because it wasn't more than 2 or 3 days later that people began to see him. Lots of people have seen him now. Always late at night, usually a stormy night like tonight, and always, except the time he came visiting me and Maud, right there on that same stretch of road where he originally disappeared." He reached down and gave the old dog a little pat on the head. "Don't you worry, Maud," he said. "He ain't gonna get us." Just then the door blew open and the wind blasted another person into our group. "Evening, boys," he said, peeling off a yellow tent of rain gear and tossing it over the empty chair in the corner. "Howdy, Emmett. Maud." "Evening, Armor," the old man responded without looking up, and Maud wheezed and shifted her position slightly. Armor was a wiry old leprechaun with a grin fixed permanently on his kindly weather-beaten face. His eyebrows were so thick that they knitted together over his nose and blended with the thick gray fringe that straggled around the hairless top of his strikingly shiny head. He drew a chair up to her table, settled back comfortably, and signaled the bartender for a pitcher of beer. "What's going on, Emmett?" "This fella," the old man nodded at me, "wants to know about Bandage Man." A glint crept into Armor's steely eyes. He leaned toward me as if to tell me something he didn't want the others to hear. "Bandage Man," he said quietly, with a sly glance down at Maud, "eats dogs." I didn't know if he was serious, but the thought clearly made Maud uncomfortable. She gave Armor a roomy glare and let out a low whine as she tried to slide under Emmett's chair. Armor settled back and took a long drink of his beer. "I guess I was about the first person to see him after the accident." The speaker, easily the tallest man in the room, stretched out toward our table from his seat at the bar, his lanky Levi-clad legs culminating in pointy-toed boots. A cowboy. He leaned against the bar, resting easily on his elbows, with a beer mug clasped between leathery hands across his belly. A shy smile revealed a mouthful of wide-spaced teeth. His was a long face, an appropriately horsey face. It's an honest and guileless face. This is not a man who will pull my leg, I thought. As everyone in the tavern turned expectantly toward the cowboy, the wind began to moan through the cracks and gaps in the old wooden building. It shivered the tavern door and lashed the rain in great horizontal sheets against the window. The old building creaked under the onslaught, and it was suddenly much colder inside. The lights flickered, then steadied, and the people in our little group seemed to draw closer together in the uncertain light. Well, said the cowboy, slightly embarrassed at the attention. "Course I didn't put together at the time. Nobody did. Sure scared the hell out of me, though. Busted the back window of my pickup, too. Remember?" Nods of assent, nervous sips, and a slight murmur said they remembered. But the cowboy reached for his beer mug and told the story anyway, for my benefit. "It was a big mystery still, you know, what happened to the bandaged giant who disappeared from the ambulance. They'd finished a second search without finding any trace of him, but I wasn't thinking about that." He drained his mug and signaled the bartender for another. I was working in the seaside then for a maintenance company. During the summer, I ran horses up here by Elk Creek, rent them to tourists. But during the winter, well, whatever comes along, we did floors and bathrooms and stuff. Usually work from about 5 to 11:30 or so. It was a Wednesday night. I remember because Wednesday was the day we did the Little Pig Market, and we just finished a little later than usual that night, at about 10 minutes to 12. I was thinking I might stop in here for a beer before I went on home. Well, right up there, just past the turnoff from 101, I was cruising along, listening to the radio and trying to see the road through the rain. It was raining just about like tonight. I felt something, like a big gust of wind. The pickup just sort of lurched a little bit, the wind pushed me over on the road a little. Outside the tavern, the wind howled like a demon, shouldering its noisy way down the street, shaking the buildings and rocking automobiles. It bashed the tavern door open, slammed it shut again 3 or 4 times in rapid succession, and blasted rain up against the front of the old building with a sound like wet buckshot falling on a tin roof. A shiver passed through the little crowd when the tavern lights flickered, went out, then came on again, permanently dimmed. The cowboy reached for his beer, took a long drink, then droned on through the storm. I drove on along, and I started wondering about how much gas I had, because I meant to get some in Seaside, but I'd forgotten till just then. The instrument panel light on my pickup never worked, but I can see all the indicators by turning on the overhead in the cab. Well, sir, still gives me a turn to remember it. I turned on the light in the cab. Turned out I had plenty of gas. But then, as I reached up to turn out the light, I heard this little noise. Sounded like something sort of scratching or rubbing on the outside of the cab. I glanced in the mirror, and there was a mummy looking through the window at me. I thought maybe the mirror was playing tricks on me, you know, rainy night and all, so I turned like this. There he was, just a couple of inches away, riding along with me in the back of my pickup. When I turned around to look, We were almost cheek to cheek. He had his face pressed up against the back window of the pickup on the outside. When my face touched the window on the inside and I saw him there, I nearly died. Then I thought, maybe it's a joke. Halloween was gone, but maybe one of these jokers was having himself a laugh. I was pretty sure my pickup bed was empty when I left Seaside, though. And then, when I looked again, I knew it wasn't a joke. His eyes were just little holes in the bandages with nothing inside. But his mouth, well, that was different. I could see lips, red lips, kind of dripping something. Maybe saliva or rain or blood, but it was not. And here he stopped for a long drink of the beer that appeared on the beer bar behind him. He wiped his mouth on the back of his arm and continued. Well, I figured I was safe. Windows rolled up, moving down the highway, him out there and me in here. Figured I'd just roll on into town and ease up here in front of the tavern where I knew there'd be a bunch of people and we'd all have a look at this guy. Just got that all figured out and was feeling kind of smug when ka-wham! It sounded like a baseball hit the window just behind my head. He busted a little hole in it, then hit it again, and the whole thing just caved in. Big chunks of safety glass all over the cab. We were eyeball to eyeball then. I could see the lights of the town coming up, and I just held on and hoped I could get there. He grunted and growled and reached for me with a big bandaged hand. Got hold of my head, twisted me so I could barely see where I was going. I couldn't get away, so I just tried to keep her on the road. Just as I got into town, he let go. There was like a gust of wind like happened when I figured he jumped into the pickup, and he was gone. I came sliding up here outside the tavern, drove on up over the curb and took out 2 parking meters before I got stopped. I was out of the pickup in a flash and busted in here all sick and shady. Told these guys I needed help to go look at my pickup. They all went out there, but he was gone. Slick as that. He disappeared. And all he left behind was a hunk of that bandage, all bloody and smelling like a rotten meat. The wind howled and rattled the old building, and Maud breathed a long sigh in a momentary stillness. The rain slackened a little. No one in our little group said anything for a few moments. The cowboy leaned up against the bar and contemplated his beer. Emmett finally broke the silence. Now, there are lots of people who tell you they've seen Bandage Man. He's jumped on other pickups, station wagons, and even a sports car or two. A couple of times, he's left broken windows and a shred or two of that awful bandage. He always attacks right about that same place, that stretch of road out towards 101, and he always disappears as soon as the car got to Cana Beach. He's never seen during the day either, but usually he pops up late on stormy nights, like tonight. There are exceptions, the cowboy broke in. Yeah, I'm getting to that. 2 exceptions. One evening, this fella came in here and said he saw a mummy carry away a hitchhiker. The fella was scared to death and he'd already called the police, but of course they couldn't find anything. Now, hitchhikers avoid that stretch of road now, especially on stormy nights, like tonight. People from around here, Armour said quietly, avoid that stretch of road anytime after dark, whatever the weather. Yep, agreed the cowboy as another shiver danced up his spine. Tell him what happened to you, Emmett. I was just fixing to do that, Emmett said, placing his beer mug up on the table and wiping the foam from his mustache. Maud groaned and the wind howled. The building shook, seemed to bend before the onslaught of the storm. Bandage Man hates Emmett, Armour said with a grin, but he loves Maud. Maud groaned again, and the wind momentarily held its sodden breath while Emmett began his story. Well, I live up on the old dump road, and some people think Bandage Man lives up there somewhere too. I don't know why they think that. I've never seen him except this one particular night I'm going to tell you about. It was the winter of 1979, December, coldest winter for 40 years. Everything was froze up for miles up and down the coast. Icicles on all the cliffs and waterfalls frozen solid. Ice on all the creeks, and every night when it got even colder, the trees exploded like they'd been dynamited. It was so cold. He snuggled into his down vest to ward off the memory. That spit froze before it hit the ground. Mayor usually spend that part of the winter curled up in some hole, warm and cozy as can be.
That's why it was real strange when dogs began to turn up missing. All over town, dogs were disappearing, but especially up there by where I live on the old dump road. It was like an epidemic. Old Maud here is the only dog for a mile in any direction from our house who survived that winter. Ain't that right, Maud?
Emmett reached down and scratched the old hound affectionately.
And she almost didn't make it.
Maud snored and wheezed in response as the wind roared in the tavern, and the little group of listeners drew even closer together, like moths around the quiet flame of Emmett's straw.
Any other year, we'd probably have figured that some old renegade bear was taking our dogs, but it was so cold that no bear would have missed out on hibernating that winter. At least that's my theory. Besides, there was other evidence. Those awful bandages. People were finding rotten bandages around after their dogs disappeared.
He leaned forward in his chair, and Maud became momentarily alert.
And footprints. We found only human footprints. Then there was poor old Madge,
He said sadly, pulling an enormous red handkerchief from his back pocket and dabbing gently at the corners of his eyes. Maud groaned again, louder than before.
Madge was Maud's best friend, our neighbor up there by the dump for years. They were puppies together.
Emmett blew his nose and took another swipe at his eyes.
About the second or third day of the deep freeze, Maud and I were out for a walk when we found her body. And or what was left of it. It was terrible. She was ripped apart and almost a whole eaten up. All that was left was some bones and a few shreds of her hide. Even her head was gone. There were human tooth marks in what was left. And right in here where we found her was one of those stinking bandages.
Emmett sat back and took a long drink of his beer. Maud groaned ever so sadly, and the wind renewed its attack on the old building, bashing the tavern door open and slamming it shut, emitting great wet gusts of the storm. Well, Emmett continued, his composure regained. The story got round that Bandage Man was eating the dogs. I believed it. We got together and went looking for him, but of course, we couldn't find him. He found us, though, Maud and me. The wind whistled around the building, and Maud groaned, loud this time, and barked a little whimpering kind of bark as she tried to shove herself further under Emmett's chair. The lights flickered, dimmed again, and stayed there. Outside, something crashed, maybe a garbage can blown over in the gale. I glanced toward the rain-swept window and thought I caught a glimpse of someone or something moving past.
It was a lot colder than tonight, Emmett continued, but it was windy, just like now, howling and roaring around our house, but we were snug as 2 bugs in a rug. I like nights like that. Built a big fire in the stove, and we just settled back with the newspaper. Now, Maud, she's not much of a watchdog, but I'd noticed that she was mighty nervous that night. I thought maybe she was just upset about Madge, but she was moaning and wheezing and barking a little, like she's been doing tonight. Didn't think anything of it, though.
Maud barked again, louder this time. Something, lightning maybe, flashed out in the rain, illuminating the street for an instant. The rain drummed louder and louder on the old building.
I just got comfortable, and I was sitting there listening to the wind. Maud was mighty nervous. She was looking right at the window, not 3 feet from where we sat, growling and barking, not like her at all. I said, "Quiet, Maud," then looked at the window to see what she was barking at.
Maud was barking louder now at the Rain Street Tavern window.
Well, sir, I looked out that window smack at that mummy. Yes, sir, he was standing right there on my front porch, looking at me and Maud.
Emmett took a long drink of his beer, and the wind, redoubling its attack on the tavern, bashed the old wooden door open once again.
When he saw me looking at him, that window just exploded. He smacked with one of those big bandaged paws and busted it all over the room, glass everywhere. He leaned through the hole and reached for Maud. He got his hand on her, but she was fighting like crazy, biting and tearing those rags. That mummy was having a time hanging on to her. Hush, Maud.
The old dog was barking frantically now, eyes fixed on the tavern window and toenails flailing the floor as she tried to back further under Emmett's chair. Emmett's eyes bulged and his nostrils flared, and he moved forward to the edge of his chair.
I jumped up out of my chair and tripped her. He tripped me, not sure which. I was trying to get my shotgun. When I looked back, he'd hooked Maud, and it looked like he was going to drag her out the window. She was fighting like mad, though, weren't you, girl? He leaned down and patted the top of her head. Maud was growling quietly now, her eyes still fixed on the tavern window. Hush, girl, he ain't gonna get us. The storm worked its way to a new peak now. The whole building quivered around us, and the lights dropped another notch. I got around the room on my knees, grabbed the gun, and let him have it. Emmett stood and shouted, leveling an imaginary shotgun at the far end of the tavern. Never said nothing, just shot, blam. Couldn't miss that range, blew a hole right through him. Maud growled and barked even louder now, and renewed her effort to back under Emmett's chair. I glanced toward the window as the old man paused, saw nothing but more rain and perhaps a flash of light. The old man sat down again. He dropped Maud and looked at me for a second. Then he grabbed Maud again, and I let him have the other barrel. Blam! 2 great big holes, but there didn't seem to be anything inside. He turned around and ran off toward the old dump, loose ends of benches flapping about in the wind. Never seen him since. Maud was going crazy now, and so was the storm. The old dog growled and scratched and barked, her eyes glued to the wood frame window. The wind raged against the old building, bashing the door open once again. The lights in the old tavern flickered again and went out. Darkness. Outside in the storm, another flash of light barreled through the dark, illuminating the rain-swept street, and in the window, a ghastly figure. The old tavern window caved in with a terrible crash. A powerful smell of rotten meat rode into the tavern on the storm. The grisly figure lurched toward Maud and Emmett. Tables, chairs, beer mugs, and bodies crashed to the floor as the members of our little group dived apart, each of us scrambling to get as far away as possible from this foul-smelling monster. Maud's fierce growl rose quickly in the darkness to a terrified shriek, then subsided to a gurgle, then the sound like the breaking of a tree limb, and she was quiet. Blows fell on something, but then the grim silhouette passed through the opening into the storm. Later, Pacific Power and Light Company said that the lights were out for less than 5 minutes in Cannon Beach that night, but to us, it seemed like 5 hours. When power was restored, we called from our hiding place and peered sheepishly at one another. Maud was gone. Emmett was gone. Only a little patch of blood and a couple of clumps of dog hair suggested they'd ever been more than figments in a dream. Also gone, though we didn't discover it till later, was the yellowed newspaper clipping. And on a glass sliver in the window frame hung a shred of blood-stained, rotten bandage. And that's Bandage Man. Not as helpful as Joshua's ghost. Definitely not helpful.
It is a great story.
All right. So those were our 2 ghost stories. And then we were going to tell a little bit of our personal stories,
Our
I
own
guess.
experiences, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll tell you mine. They're definitely not as exciting as Bandage Men, which thank goodness, honestly. So mine happened when I was a kid. I grew up in Eugene, and my family house is, call it country adjacent. Like you go a block away, you're in the country, but it's kind of suburby. And in the back, we call it the ditch, but it's like a flood easement type thing. So it's basically like a little forest with ponds in the back. And we would play down in there. And usually we'd all play with friends, but for whatever reason, this one day I decided to play by myself. And if you go to the left a little towards the main road, which still not very main, but it goes under the main road in these big tunnels. So there's one really big tunnel, and then there's one smaller one that you could like shuffle through, but there's always water. So, and then there's a third tunnel. It's like really, you wouldn't be able to get there at all. So I'm just playing, my like 10-year-old, whatever age self in the little pond in front of it. And all of a sudden I hear footsteps in the tunnel. And I look in the main tunnel because that's the only one it can be. It can't be the little short one because it would you'd hear water, or it would sound different. You'd be like shuffling on the sides, and no one is there. And on the other side, like there's blackberry bushes and stuff. So no, you couldn't get away quickly. Like there's no way someone could like sneak in there and then sneak out and just like step a few times and then be gone. So I don't know. I don't know what it was, but it creeped me out. I went home, and I don't think I ever played down in that area by myself, at least again. So, all right. How about you, Joshua?
Yeah. Again, my experience is not it's not really that scary. It's kind of goofy, actually. So I used to live in Indonesia, and if in the capital city of Jakarta, and what's interesting about Indonesia is people there really believe in ghosts. Like seriously, everybody there has some kind of ghost story. Everyone there has either seen a ghost or known someone who's seen a ghost. So maybe it's just being in that environment that kind of rubbed off on me. I even had like some students who were kind of like well known to have like be kind of like ghost mediums. Like they could go to a place and tell you if it was haunted, and see somebody who had passed on in a building or something. But my experience is I was home just after a day of work, and I was getting ready for bed, and there had been a storm, so it was nice and cool outside. You know, tropical climate, it's really warm at night, but that night it was pretty cool. So I kind of opened my door a little bit to let some of the cool air in. And I was going to my living room to close the door, and all of a sudden there was like a gust, and then the door like flung open and slammed against the wall. And after that, I just had this weird feeling that I wasn't alone in the room, and that there was just some other presence there. And I got so scared. And that was the first time I'd ever felt that like that. And like a crazy person, I just like, I texted one of my friends, and I'm like, help, there's a ghost in my house. And it was like 9 o'clock at night. And then she answered me. She's like, what are you talking about? If you're so scared, just leave. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. That was pretty silly of me. And I just kind of like, before I went to bed, I'm like, all right, ghost, if you're in here, you can stay for a little bit, but in the morning you got to go. and don't wake me up. And then I just went to bed, and that was it. That's my ghost story. Yeah. You're muted, Michaela.
There we go. All right, those are our personal stories, and I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I think just we need to check in one more time with our mysterious co-host, make sure but we can all go to bed tonight knowing that the dolls are where they're supposed to be.
Last
all right,
check.
Let's throw it to the mysterious co-host. Okay. They're coming. Okay. Uh-oh.
Gone.
That's probably not great, but I'm sure everything is fine. I'm
Where's the
sure
where's the
they
dolls?
just moved the dolls. So I'm gonna go
Where'd they go?
check on that. And oh my god.
Oh my God.